Hello there. Welcome to Britton's Hangout Hour, episode 4, I think. uh, anyways, I am here today with another good friend of mine. He's from Arkansas. Fayetteville, is it?
Yeah, though not to be too particular, I don't know if "from" is the right terminology.
Or maybe not. That's where you're located.
That is where I'm currently located. Yes.
Um, yeah, he's a good friend of mine. He's a filmmaker, film aficionado, all sorts of things. Andrew, how are you doing today? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Well, I don't know how in depth to go. I mean, yeah, you kind of gave the bullet points. I am currently residing in Fayetteville. I'm a filmmaker. I guess to give a little bit more to color in some more background, I am from California, born and raised. Lived in, well, for the first 18 years of my life, lived in Fairfield, which is about an hour outside of San Francisco. Went to college in Southern California. Hopped around a couple different colleges. Graduated in 2009, and then I resided in the Los Angeles area for about 15 years. And then the pandemic hit, changed a lot of things. My wife and I, who is now my wife, I should say, girlfriend at the time, decided we're just going to go all in. We're going to get married. We're going to move to somewhere completely different, give life a shot. And so, yeah, we've been here since the very end of 2020, and it's been a ride, to say the least. So, yeah, I guess that's sort of a brief history.
Yeah, it was funny. I was in Fayetteville about a month back. I was thinking about seeing you, but I was like, probably could save it for another time when I'm out in Rogers again. But yeah, it was a good time. I saw my cousin graduate from Arkansas college.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
U of A, I assume. The one that's right down the road here.
Yeah, from Rogers, or my grandmother's from Rogers.
Nice.
It's like, oh yeah, that's like 20 minutes away. So you.
Rogers is a nice area. I gotta say, like, as somebody who had never seen, I just so it's funny. A funny story how I ended up here. You know,
I was gonna ask why'd you decide on Arkansas?
Yeah, it's really random, to be honest with you, man. So never again. If you would have asked me like 3 years ago, or if we could time travel, if I could go back 3 years ago and tell myself living in Glendale at the time, a mile down from Disney Studio, like, in a year from now, you're going to be living in Arkansas. I'd be like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? It's just a weird thing. So the thing about it was, though, so my best friend, friend of mine named Travis, who I've known since 3rd grade, he and I have kept in touch over the years, and what happened was he was always kind of let me think of I'm not trying to insult him. I'm just trying to think of a nicer way to put this. He's sort of has a rogue personality, likes to hit the road, likes to change his mind about what he wants to do every few months or so, likes to dip his finger in different pots. And so he was living in San Francisco for years and years, and then he went on a road trip. He told me back in, I'd say, 2017, he's like, hey man, I'm moving to Arkansas. I'm like, what? And I'm like, of all places, that's where you're going? And he was like, yeah man, you wouldn't believe it. Like, Northwest Arkansas it's got this whole community. It's super cool. It's not at all what you expect when you hear the word Arkansas. So he ended up there, met his now wife. They're expecting their second child, probably, any day now, actually. I think she's due in July. So He kind of settled down, and he was like, "This is where I want to be." So my wife and I, back in 2019, so this was probably about 6 months before COVID hit. We decided, like, he kept trying to convince us to go out there and visit him, and we're like, okay, sure, yeah, it'd be fun to see you guys and hang out. So we planned a trip. Believe it was in September of 2019, and we just came out, visited here, and I was like, I kind of like the slower pace of life out here. It's kind of cool. We actually didn't really get out and explore a whole lot of the area, but we went a few places, and I saw bits of the life here, and I was like, that's kind of cool. I've lived this sort of high-speed life in Los Angeles for so many years. And sometimes I feel like I'm running myself ragged in my field. It's just it's a constant hustle, like trying to do this kind of work. It's especially if you're a freelancer. Everybody in this industry will pretty much tell you, like, if you're not actively seeing a therapist to deal with your stress, your anxiety, like you're gonna end up in a bad spot. I mean, I think that you could argue that's in many fields these days, but particularly in entertainment. So I don't know. I just was like, yeah, it's just nice little vacation area to get away from. Never thought, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna end up living here. But what happened was during COVID, first of all, for a good while at the beginning there, the industry basically shut down, like as a lot of, obviously people lost work, this, that, and the other, all over the map, all over the world, really. But the industry was like, yeah, we're putting on a pause until we can figure some things out. But up until that point, a lot of the freelance work I was doing was actually remote. So I was working as an editor and also working as a writer, picking up gigs wherever I could. And I was starting to get some pretty cool gigs, actually, with a particular company that I met kind of through a network of a friend of a friend. And I started doing a lot of, I don't know how you describe this kind of work, because there's not a specific title for it other than, I guess, writer. But it's not like I just write and I write a script and then somebody makes a movie. It's not quite that straightforward. What I was basically doing was this company did a lot of work for nonprofit organizations and corporations, making kind of promotional videos and just kind of testimonial, like just different little like ad type of videos or videos that you would see on a company's website to explain what they're all about, right? So it's funny because he reached out to me. I worked on another project with this guy. He had reached out to me because he had this project that he wanted to do, where he was a director, he was an editor, cinematographer, one of those one-man crew kind of guys. He did all of the work himself, but he's like, what I hate doing is I hate trying to actually cut down content, and he's like, I hate the process of editing down projects and getting to the meat of it and trying to figure out the story part of the whole thing. He's like, I don't mind editing, I don't mind piecing things together, but he's like, finding the story is the hard part for me. So what he hired me to do was he would send me these transcripts of the interviews he would do. And he'd be like, look, here's 2 hours of interviews, and we need to find a 3-minute story in here.
Oh God.
So so he's like, can you figure out what from these interviews we can build a story around? And I got really excited, not to just do this kind of work. I got excited because I was like, dude, this is my bread and butter. I I went to film school, but throughout all that process, I got involved in writing and screenwriting, and I got really kind of hyper-focused on story theory and myth and all these kind of things. While I was in LA, I started a writers group where we would go back and kind of talk about the Joseph Campbell myth structure, all this kind of stuff, and deconstruct the idea of story and narrative and what makes a good story, what makes a compelling film versus what's a compelling novel, and like historically, how has the idea, almost from a sociological perspective, how has the way we tell stories evolved over time? So all of this is fun to me. Like, I did this in my free time, kind of hobby, but also, there's this, if you're a filmmaker, you're wanting to build your career, you're wanting to hone your skills, and that's sort of like, that's a catch-22, right? Because the dream for most people is to do to get paid for a living, to do what you love most, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's a catch-22 because then you get so hyper-focused on having to do this type of work that it can kind of it can wear you out to a point where it's like, okay, the thing that I'm passionate about is now an obligation. And now it's no longer just a fun hobby. It's like, okay, shit, I have to do this stuff now. And there's that's the problem. And that's where I see, when we see things like certain Hollywood narratives that get repeated over and over, and formulas that cliches that develop, for lack of a better term, sort of like narrative laziness.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten to a point where it's like, I get it, man, because when you do it for a job, there comes a point where like you have to sit back and go like, okay, well, they're giving me all these notes, and when I'm telling a story, I have to hit all these bullet points. So here's the best I can do. Here you go, guys. Have fun with it. That's what I imagine goes on in the average screenwriter's mind, say if they're writing for like Marvel or something at this point, It's like, what bullet points do we want to hit? Okay, here's 10 pages of notes on that script. It's grueling. So I guess in a long-winded way, this is me saying I got involved in kind of this on the bottom level. Obviously, in this industry, you start somewhere, you work your way up. I felt like my career in 2020 was at a decent point where I was like starting to be able to say, earn money doing what I love to do without having to like drive Uber on the side as much to pay my bills, which I was doing for years and years. So that was sort of like exciting, and that started to pick up actually in 2020. But the problem was, during the pandemic, work was still somewhat limited, and I got to a point where I was like, okay, my wife and I, we had just gotten engaged, we were about to get married. We are paying, this is considered on the low end, and this is, I don't know what context you have for life in major cities, but like...
I've heard California is very expensive. I know that.
It is.
I don't know, because I've never been there. Though, funnily enough, my great aunt and uncle and second cousin also moved from California back to Arkansas, because that's where they're originally from. So, yeah, I've heard it's very expensive down there.
Yes.
Or up there, or You're by right. The side. I live in Oklahoma, so.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, growing up where I lived in Northern California, I didn't have to pay rent because I, lived with my parents through high school. But once I went to college and, started to experience high cost of living in LA, for years and years, I just kind of did the bachelor life, lived with multiple roommates, had to work 2 or 3 part-time jobs on the side. It's just crazy, man. But it got to a point where we were paying, at the time we were paying about $1,700 for a small 1-bedroom apartment that we could barely fit in. And again, that was happening with the pandemic, and not, like, for example, I wasn't going to be going out and driving strangers around in my car anymore. That was a given. So thankfully government aid was able to help out a bit when we were struggling with that. But I did develop a career path that seemed to be mostly focused on just remote work, whether it was editing or writing. Those were my two things I was aiming to do more than anything else. And I would still work in the industry. I would work on set occasionally, but that didn't seem like it was going to be happening for me anytime soon, you know? So I was like, if I move to Arkansas, where my friend lives, and he's told me, hey man, there's a burgeoning industry here in Northwest Arkansas, like he's telling me all about it. He said, you can live here and do your work, like the kind of work you do anywhere, basically. So that became a compelling idea because we were paying $1,700, and then our landlord, who's just an awful person through and through.
Oh wow! Shots fired.
Yeah, he oh, trust me, I have many more shots to fire. This guy was the worst though. He instead of like giving us a break, he's like, okay, by the way, your rent is going up another $100 at the end of the year. So
yeah, this does sound like a dick move.
Yeah, so that was kind of the last straw for us. We're like, yeah, let's try. It had been suggested to us, like, hey, like if things are not working out in LA or whatever major city, and you have the opportunity to do different kind of work, why don't you just try that out? You know, like give life somewhere else a shot. Because I lived in California my whole life. My wife had lived in LA her whole life, basically. So we had never. This was all foreign to us. So we're like, well, maybe it is worth giving life a shot somewhere else. So that's pretty much how we ended up here. But in this whole process, it has been a roller coaster. I could go into a lot of it, but basically, I've gotten to work on some really cool projects, and I've gotten to work on some utter nightmare projects.
I remember you telling me a while back you were working on a John Malkovich movie, and from how you described it to me, it sounded really dumb in like the best way possible.
Right. Well, I'm not going to go into too many details about that. I'm a little careful about the specifics as far as what I say about it. I will say that John Malkovich is a very nice person. I met him briefly on set, and I met some other people of note. Developed some great relationships, but there were a lot of awful things that went on during that project. And all I'm going to say publicly is that there were some things that the union was not really happy about that were going on this project.
Fair enough.
I think that is an understatement, but that's basically the extent of what I'll say about that, because the problem is this industry. I mean, people will take any little thing you say about anybody and they'll try to run with it. And I have some really kind things to say about a lot of the people I worked with on that, and I have some really not so kind things to say about some other people. But anybody who's been involved in that project will pretty much tell you it was not a fun time. And I don't think really anybody had fun on it. So I will say that that's fair to say.
I hope it wasn't Apocalypse Now levels of bad.
Well, probably not. I mean, I did compare myself to, like, early Herzog a little bit. Not being Herzog, but being a part of, some of the early antics going on there. But yeah, man, it was ridiculous. But that was not a fun project. But I did get to work on a project before that, Chamber Piece, directed by Neil LaBute, with Justin Long and Kate Bosworth. And that that was a lot of fun. We had some issues on that, but it was a lot of it was typical production issues. And it's when you're filming a low budget chamber piece, so to speak. It was a fascinating experience. The biggest problem everybody had on that shoot, though, was it was all night shoots. So think of working like 13 to 14 hours from like 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Oh my
6
God.
p.m. to like 8 a.m. for like 12 days straight. That's pretty much what happened. So that was very grueling, to say the least. But it was a fascinating experience, and this is another aspect of my career. I guess I didn't really touch on a whole lot, but it's funny that we're getting into this now. And if you want to redirect the conversation, feel free. I mean, I have a million tangents I can go on. That's just kind of how my brain works.
All right. So yeah.
But I was just going to explain what a COVID officer does.
All right. You can say what a COVID officer does. I'm kind of interested.
Yeah. So this was something that happened randomly. Again, this was the end of 2020. Obviously, still peak pandemic. This was while my wife and I were still living in LA. I had a good friend who was messaging us and saying, "Hey, you guys should come out and see this thing I'm working on. It's so cool." And she explained, and she says, "I'm working as a lead COVID compliance supervisor on this Stranger Things drive-in experience." So what it was literally this production company rented out a whole parking garage in downtown LA and retooled it to meet union safety standards for what you could do, because this was a few months after the industry had just restarted, but with all of these new extreme safety stipulations, right? So in order to enforce all these safety stipulations, they created a new role for the industry, which is a COVID compliance officer, or there's different names for it. Some prefer COVID safety supervisor or health and safety supervisor. There's different names, but the most common one that they go with is COVID compliance officer. So you have to jump through a few hoops, get some certifications, and then you got to familiarize yourself with the union protocols for how you shoot on set. So all of this was, obviously very new. It's new to everybody, but I mean, my friend kind of explained it to me, and she said, "You should work on my team. Like, this is a way that people like us can still work in the industry and be safe. Say even if we have certain, even people who have certain health issues that put them at risk. They're like, the advantage of working in this kind of field is you're literally in charge of keeping people safe. So, if they're not wearing the right mask, if they're not wearing a mask properly, you are kind of in charge of making sure everything is like a tight ship is being run." And this was obviously very, very important prior to, having vaccines and all this other kind of stuff. So things get a little bit more complex as they go when you get into the weeds here. But basically, she recruited me to work on this Stranger Things drive-in experience, and my main duty was, to patrol the set, all of the scare actors. I guess I didn't really explain what it was. The drive-in experience. Have you ever been to Universal Studios or any place that has scare mazes?
Yes.
Where they have people run around and jump out from behind the corner in the costume and all that kind of stuff. So what this production company did was they did a really high budget version of that people could do inside of their cars. So it was super cool, actually, because basically, like I said, they rented this whole garage, and every level of the garage, they kind of blacked it out. They put these tarps on the edge so they could at least have some control over the lighting. But I think this was soon after obviously not the newest season, but I guess the previous season was season 3 of Stranger Things. I don't know if you watch it, but
I have seen all 3 of the seasons except for the recent one. I'm waiting for the other episodes to come out so I can watch all of it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I have heard it's really good though.
Yeah, a little sidebar on that. To be honest with you, I'm not I'm not a naysayer, so to speak, but I was never really a huge fan of the first 3 seasons. I thought they were decent, but for me it was an issue of a product that was clearly trying to be the ultimate cliche of a pitch, of an elevator pitch. So if you don't know what that is,
I know what an elevator pitch is.
So yeah, this meets this. It's this project. So everybody was like, dude, watch Stranger Things. It's Stephen King meets Steven Spielberg. And so my issue was it is just so much that. It is just the ultimate, they're just trying to hit every single Spielberg meets Stephen King kind of cliche that I could imagine in my head. And it wasn't done poorly. I was just that was it prevented it from feeling super fresh to me, I guess. But all that being said, I never thought it was a bad show, anything like that. All that being said, the new season, I feel is excellent. Thus far, I really, really have been liking the new season a lot. I feel like it's finally come into its own, even though it is clearly referencing other sci-fi and horror narratives. The characters, the acting, the way that it has been developing this season, I've been really impressed with. I've been enjoying this season quite a bit. So
yeah, that's what I've heard, and then I just kind of sit back and go you bastards.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just really? Now you decide to be oh, this is actually good now. Oh, we weren't bashing it for 3 seasons. I'm you fake bastards.
I know, and it's funny too because everybody complains about the 3rd season, and it's just it had its issues, but I didn't really love it or hate it any too much more than I didn't have any stronger feelings about it than I did the first 2 seasons, other than that one random bottle episode they did with 11 that everybody agrees is the worst episode of the series. But that's either here nor there. Okay, to redirect to my original tangent here, as I'm working on this drive-in experience, it was it was a really cool thing to witness. I never got to actually drive through it myself because once this became a thing, it was the thing to do. When people got tickets, it was literally booked up 6 months in advance, and then they were like, well, we're not going to keep it going any longer than that. And then I think they extended it a couple more months. It was originally supposed to be just a Halloween month thing, I think. Mm-hmm. And then they just kept adding dates and adding dates and adding dates because it was during the pandemic, there was nothing else to do. People in LA were well, we can't go to bars. We can't, even if they wanted to, that kind of stuff was no longer an option. So they're what's something fun that we can do? And this was clearly the thing. So
that does sound pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty rad. So my job on the whole thing was to make sure all of the workers and all of the people doing it were following, keeping their masks on, making sure they're being safe, they're following the basic protocols. And also, a big part of COVID compliance is testing. So that's the other safety barrier. So literally, I was helping the team test hundreds of people a day on set. So we had to, make sure everybody was spacing out in the lines. We had to keep really close tabs on all this kind of stuff. So you have to obviously run a really tight ship on all this. So that was kind of how I started. I had a really good time working on that. But it was kind of unfortunate timing in a way, because as I started doing that, I was like, this is decent money. I could keep doing this technically on this team for a while and work on other productions and this, that, and the other. But we had already made our plans to move to Arkansas. So we were like, yeah, well, we thought about possibly redirecting and staying. And it was a big, tough move for my wife, too, because she's been a hairdresser for like 11, 12 years. And she had a pretty good career going doing that. But her job kept shutting down as well during the pandemic. So it was, it was just not ideal, obviously, for either of us.
Yeah, no, it wasn't an ideal situation for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's fair to say. But so yeah, we all knew like we'd have to be starting from scratch in a sense. Like if she was going to be doing hair again, she has to build new clientele out here and everything. So it was going to be a hard decision either way, but we decided to stick with the move because we're like, let's try this different thing out for a while. Even though it was like, well, I got some work for a while, but I don't, as a freelancer, I don't even know how long that whole thing would last. But then when I moved out here, soon after I got plugged in with Rock Hill Studios, which is the local studio here in Fayetteville, and they have worked on a few projects of note, and I basically kind of interviewed with the guy who owned the studio and said, hey, I'm new in town, and somebody referred me to him, and we chatted for a while, and I told him, he asked me about my background. I was like, yeah, I'm aspiring writer-director. I also have I'm an editor. I do this kind of work. I do that kind of work. I've worked for projects for like Netflix. I've worked for all these different like high-profile clients, So I went in, and he's like, oh, that's cool. That's awesome stuff. We'll see. And then I forgot to mention, I was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm also a COVID compliance officer. And he's like, oh my God, we need you. There's like nobody here.
You were the COVID compliance officer? Plot twist.
Yeah, exactly. So then they kind of like interviewed me, and that's when they brought me onto the Justin Long Cape Bosworth project, because that was going to be happening soon after. And then dates got moved around. They kept delaying it. It was this whole crazy thing. But it was a good experience. But it was also like, this was my first time doing a COVID compliance gig all by myself. And so that was tough because I'm learning all of these ropes, and I'd have to have these really long calls with the producers, and we'd have to sort of dissect and deconstruct the language of the SAG contracts to know what exactly we had to do to be fully compliant. So it was a learning experience for everybody involved. But it was also fun, like I said. At the same time, what's that?
Oh, I was letting you finish your thought.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just saying, that does sound like an interesting time.
Yes. Oh, yeah, interesting for sure. I will say, we were very fortunate. No positive cases on set. We did have one positive case with somebody who is associated with the studio, but they made sure we quarantined and tested everybody they came in contact with, and everything worked out great. So
that's better.
We kept a tight ship. I can't say that for every other project I've worked on, but yeah, that was. This was a nice introduction to doing this kind of work as well, because for one thing, this, like I said, it's a chamber film. It's actually shot at this castle here in Fayetteville. I know that sounds crazy, but yeah, there's a castle. And it's not like a medieval, like full-on medieval castle. It's basically like this kind of mansion that this guy built to kind of look like a castle, probably 30, 40 years ago, I imagine. But it's a really cool place, really, really cool location. So what was nice was, since pretty much the whole film was shot at this one location, I didn't have to worry about, like say we go to a different testing center, I have to set up a certain tent in a certain area and make sure A, B, and C person get tested. It was a lot more simpler when you just have one location. Every time the lab comes to test people, they go to the same place. People, we have emails out. People know when they're supposed to test, all that kind of stuff. It was really, really, it was nice and easy to streamline it that way. So that was a good experience to kind of get all of that, to having to kind of break my teeth on doing a project like that. But
yeah.
But after that, projects started getting more complex, and like I said, there were some good ones and some not so good ones that I had to be involved with. So the thing overall, though, is it is a very tough job. I will say that much. Working on set in general is difficult, but there was this joke when I was working on House of Darkness, the Neil Butte film. There was this joke that the first AD. So I don't know how well you know all of the roles on a film set. The first assistant director is the person who literally calls the shots. So like they're making sure that everybody stays on task, on schedule. If a scene is taking too long, they're kind of like the one who has to pressure the director and let everybody know, like, oh, guys, we only have like 10 more minutes before we have to move on, stuff like that. So typically the first assistant director is the most unpopular role on set. But like during a safety meeting on the second week, he was like, I think the film gods that there has now been created a role that is hated more than the first AD on film sets, which is the code compliance officer. So,
oh boy,
Neil
LaBute is the one who did Wicker Man. Oh my lord.
He did the remake of Wicker Man, and we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that one. It's funny too. Neil is he's a little bit of a controversial figure. I know that there were like some. I don't need to go into like all of the controversies, but he's been accused of things like misogyny from a certain angle in his work before. He released this film in the 90s called In the Company of Men. Very great film in my opinion, but I feel like a lot of people have misread it as misogynistic when I feel like it's actually quite the opposite. He's mainly a playwright, actually. That's where he sort of birthed his craft, was on the stage. So anything...
He does sound like a contentious figure. Just...
Yeah. So House of Darkness is him going back to the horror genre, and this time I think he really did something fun with it. I haven't seen the film yet, but it premiered at Santa Barbara International Film Festival this year, and Variety gave it a really good review. So I think that I don't know if there were other critics who had a chance to see it yet, but it seems like the first impressions are good. I am excited to see it myself. Like I said, I had a lot of fun with it. I felt like Justin and Kate were really had great chemistry. And it's funny though. Apparently, it's indisputable that they had great chemistry because now they are an item. So all of that apparently started on this project, which we I will say a few of us had our suspicions. But sometimes it's hard to parse out. It's like, are they just acting really well? Are they like kind of character acting outside of their outside of their role? But it was we felt like we picked up on a few hints there, here and there.
So you like a lot of more. I don't mean to interrupt you, by the way.
No, man, go for it. I've been talking nonstop, so get some words in for sure.
I know you like a lot of more experimental movies. Would that be accurate? I don't know.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I feel like, I guess it's fair to say I like the craft of cinema across the board. But
you made a pretty weird short movie a while back. I saw it. I texted you and I was like, I don't know if I get this.
yeah. Oh, you're talking about Eclipse, probably.
Yeah.
Right. So yes. I love psychological horror for one thing, and I love anything that pushes boundaries. I think it is sort of my niche.
All right.
I like anything that is challenging. Any kind of art that is challenging, I'm there for it.
Mm-hmm.
I like to tell people I prefer an interesting movie often to a good one. So I think that I do like experimental stuff. I like to experiment, but I think that even saying I like experimental stuff is limiting. And I mean, I know that's very deconstructionist of me to say.
I was going to say, I didn't mean to sound like I was demeaning or anything.
Oh, no, I didn't take it that way. But what I am saying from that is that I think that, like, I'm not going to say I'm like, I'm David Lynch, for example.
Wow.
Right? I mean, I don't think I'm some incredible director or anything like that. I'm trying to build a career on that and build my skills in that field, and that is my passion and my aspiration. But artists, I think, here's what I'll say: artists like David Lynch, I think, operate on a different level of craftsmanship and storytelling than almost any other director out there. But I'm going to asterisk that, and I would say that somebody like Martin Scorsese also is on the same level. And Scorsese is typically associated with more quote-unquote straightforward narratives, right?
Well, yeah.
So
unless you watch something like Last Temptation of Christ, I wouldn't call that a... I feel like Marty gets lowballed a lot. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, Goodfellas. And don't get me wrong, I love Goodfellas. But he's made some really pensive films, I think you could call it. Like Taxi Driver, for instance. I think that's a very misunderstood movie.
Absolutely. And see, that's what I'm talking about, though. Like, I think that the greatest directors are often misunderstood because people take their craft on a surface level. And I think that somebody, say, like David Lynch, or even someone like Lars von Trier nowadays, or other people like that, people will either, like, often excuse them as they're that weird person or that weird director. But I think that what gives people that impression is the fact that they give you no choice. Generally speaking, they give you no choice but to take their film, to dive in deep, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Like, somebody could watch, let's say Scorsese. Let's give it, so like Goodfellas, you brought up. Goodfellas is kind of thrown around as this. It's sort of what you call quote unquote stereotypical like film bro movie.
Yeah, I've heard there's been a lot of talk about the so-called film bro, which that's always bothered me. But okay, I see what you're getting at.
Yeah. But
I think it's very patronizing.
Right. But there is this type, right, of dude who, like, he's like, oh yeah, my favorite movies are like Boondock Saints and Goodfellas, and it's just like, okay, but like, what do you like about those narratives? You know,
Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. So, Pulp Fiction's and like Tarantino in general. That's a whole conversation in and of itself. I have so many opinions about Tarantino. This would be a whole podcast, I think, on itself. So with Scorsese, like in my mind, he's definitely one of the top 10 living directors, like without question, in my opinion. And every single film that he makes, I know that he's an expert craftsman, but what I think makes him an incredible talent is he never refuses, or he never compromises his work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is always something else going on underneath the surface of a Scorsese film.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually the perfect example of what I'm talking about is Shutter Island.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know your general opinion of it, but
I enjoy that movie.
Shutter Island, I think, is one of Marty's. I don't know if I would say it's one of his absolute best, but I think it's one of his most underrated films.
I would agree with that.
Because
also the novel's really good too.
I haven't read any. Is it Dennis Lehane who wrote
yeah, that? I actually just read A Drink Before the War recently, and it was really good.
Yeah, I haven't read any of his work yet. Actually, I've been meaning to for a long time. But I have heard great things about the novel. All I gotta say though is, Shutter Island is so thematically dense. Like, there's so much happening in that film that is here's the thing. When I watch a movie, let's say like The Usual Suspects, once you know the twist of that movie, it's sort of like, okay, like by the third time you watch it, I feel like it's almost inevitable that the whole movie gets kind of silly. You know, it relies so much on the twist that The Usual Suspects becomes sort of, it's almost become a whipping boy, I think, for mocking the idea of like a silly twist in a movie. Like outside of, say, like M. Night Shyamalan or whatever.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, outside of like Shyamalan, I think Usual Suspects is generally, at least my impression anecdotally, is that it's sort of this whipping boy for, it's like Usual Suspects. If you find out that's, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it and wants to see it, but if there is somebody who isn't quite what they seem, and then it makes you rethink the whole thing, I think it's just, I see it more as like a cheap trick than anything.
I wonder what you think of 7 then.
I'll get into that in a bit. But for Shutter Island, I think that the problem is when people watch Shutter Island, I think a lot of people felt like they were they had a reading of it akin to Usual Suspects, where the whole time they're like, well, what's the twist? Oh, I bet it's this. Is it this? Is this the twist? Is this what's going to happen? And then when it happens, people are like, I knew it. That was dumb. And see, that's sort of the problem I have.
It's a good impression.
With, like, an approach that's a problem I have with an approach to filmmaking that somebody could associate, quote, if you want to be really
I
sort
think
of condescending in a broad stroke, the film bro in the worst sense would be like, dude, that was Martin Scorsese at his worst, because like I saw that twist coming from the very beginning, and I'm like, okay, but you do realize that Shutter Island is not about the twist, right? Like it's not at all about what you find out about the quote unquote true nature of that character at the end.
I was about to
it's
say,
about like. Go ahead.
I was about to say, I feel like Shutter Island is more about the guy's like fractured mental state and the guilt he feels for what he did, more than the twist of the movie.
Yes, like it this is.
I mean, one of Marty's favorite themes is guilt, so there you go.
Yeah, exactly, and that's like the most pronounced, I think, example of that in its work, even.
Aside from The Irishman?
Yeah, The Irishman is that's a complex one. Yeah, I would say that The Irishman is in the stereotypical wheelhouse of Martin Scorsese. Yeah, I think that it is an apropos sort of, even though it's not technically not his swan song, it feels like a swan song. You know, it feels like this is his reflection on what he's known for in his body of work. So I'm okay bending to that a little bit. But Shutter Island for me was just this experience of guilt and trauma. You know, it's like there are just some really powerfully directed scenes in that movie that I think turn the idea of, like, it explores so many themes at once. It explores guilt, it explores trauma, it explores PTSD. Trauma and PTSD, you could argue those are the same. I would argue different, but it explores those themes. It explores the idea of masculinity. It explores just the psychology of denial. Like, there are so many layers to that story that go beyond, it was this twist the entire time, right? Like, that's the crux of it, right? Have you seen Adaptation?
No, but I want to because I love Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah.
I want to.
Adaptation, I won't spoil it for you too much, but it's funny because, do you know the basic premise of Adaptation?
I know Nicolas Cage plays Charlie Kaufman.
Yes.
And I know he plays, like, his twin brother, or it's like, it's kind of like a fictionalized thing. It's really weird from what I've heard.
Yes. Yeah, so Adaptation is incredible, first and foremost. But it's easily my second or third favorite Nicolas Cage performance. But the thing about it is, Adaptation is all about, yes, it's Charlie Kaufman, Nick Cage plays him, and yes, he plays his fictional twin brother. So it's sort of like two different parts of him. And that's a whole fun thing in and of itself. But the sort of, anybody who's a writer or who's an aspiring writer, especially in film, I think that movie alone needs to be their Bible. Like, because that movie it pokes fun and sort of deconstructs the whole idea of relying on a specific kind of narrative to be at the forefront of how you should say write a movie, right? And it's all about deconstructing that narrative in and of itself of, like, well, why do we have to have a conflict? Why can't I just write a movie about a flower? Like, what if I don't want to follow? What if I don't want to follow the rules? And so there's this whole thing where he goes to his twin brother, who's like just a total buffoon, goes to this Robert McKee writing conference, which I don't know if you're familiar with Robert McKee, but he's considered sort of like the
Didn't he
guru.
do, what's that book?
Story, just called Story, is his big...
Yeah, something like The Anatomy of Story or something.
It's just called Story, I think. Yeah, I literally have it on the top of my shelf. It's just, it's just called Story. He has done this seminar for, I think, decades now, what's the actor's name? Brian. What's his name?
What role was he in?
The original Hannibal Lecter.
Oh yes.
Brian. Why am I? Oh my God, that bothers me so much when I just.
Brian Lee.
No.
He was in the Bourne Identity. He was in the Bourne movies.
Yes, correct. So you know who I'm talking about.
I know who you're talking about. Yes. Yeah. He's in that show, Succession. Brian Cox.
Brian Cox, yes. I was going to say Brian Dennehy. I was like, that's way off. Brian Cox plays Robert McKee. And, like, there's this whole scene where he goes, like, he's ashamed because his brother goes to this conference and he learns all these like principles for how to write a good screenplay, and then he writes this psychological thriller that is like the most trite thing you've ever heard, and the Charlie Kaufman character makes fun of him for it, and he's like, "Are you kidding? Like, you can't do this." And he's like, "No, but you don't understand. Like, he's really the cop and this other woman and the person they're after. It's all the same guy. At the end, you find out. Isn't that fucked up?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "The only thing that's more trite than, you know."
It kind of does look like Brian Cox.
Yeah. So, anyways, Nicolas Cage, the Charlie Kaufman character, gives him a hard time, but then he feels so conflicted, and he has such bad writer's block about this script he's been commissioned for that he ends up going to a Robert McKee conference, and he's feeling like you can see him like sinking in his seat, and he feels like so guilty about it. And it's just this epic moment of meta comedy where he's like, "Why am I even here? Fuck, what am I doing?" Like, it's this whole voiceover, and you hear the Robert McKee character yelling as he's doing this voiceover, and then after, in between one of his like voiceover things, Robert McKee yells, "And if you use voiceover in your script, God help you." Like, he just totally like points his finger and just, you know, he makes fun of the way that the actual movie is. So it's so good. But all that being said, so the funny thing about adaptation is, like, it's inspiring in a sense because you see the movie itself is about the conflict of writing, and I know a lot of my film cinephile friends are sort of tired of, it's sort of how the general public, like, let's just say the average moviegoer who's not like a quote film buff or whatever, goes and sees a Marvel movie, and they're like, "Cool, that's fun. I'm looking forward to like Iron Man 6 or whatever." And then they go, and then there inevitably is going to be an experience for many people where they see like 8 Marvel movies in a row, and they're like, "You know, I don't know if I'm excited to see another one." I feel like cinephiles have this issue, like a lot of my extreme film buff friends have this issue with movies about movies. They're like, "Okay, all right, so we're doing another one of these, right? Like, where it's a struggling screenwriter or a struggling actor or what have you. Like, can't Hollywood take its head out of its ass and write about something other than its own industry, you know?" So I get that criticism, and yet, like, I still can't help myself that I really like a lot of these kinds of movies too. But adaptation, I think, is like one of the best, because it really it's a great way to shine a light on like seeing the actual conflict of a writer. And it doesn't have to be like, if you're not a screenwriter, like, I think just the craft of writing in general, it's going to be right before you seeing that similar kind of struggle on screen.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I was just gonna say, well, I mean, I would call myself I'm a journalist. I've written articles mainly. I would like to write novels. I've certainly thought about writing screenplays or, you know, whatever. You know, I've thought about writing comics and whatever, you know, that kind of stuff. I've thought about seeing adaptation. I really love Charlie Kaufman's stuff, though, from what I've seen of it. Like, Anomalisa is really good. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I know Michael Gondry directed it, but he wrote it, so, I mean, I still think it's...
Well, Kaufman was known for years for just being a writer, you know? Like, I mean, adaptation is Spike Jonze directed it. So, it's... Yeah, I mean... I think it was Spike Jonze who directed it.
I just love the way he explores real life issues through these like kind of weird fantastical edges. Like, you know, Anomalisa, you see he explores loneliness with just this weird concept of this guy who is just unable to, who has this weird thing where he can't see or hear anyone without hearing the same voice and the same face.
Right.
And then he meets this woman who finally gives him, something different. And, that was actually the first one I saw. And then I saw Eternal Sunshine, and I really loved that movie.
Yeah.
Just a great... he's like... Him and Aaron Sorkin are probably my favorite screenwriters working today. I would also mention David Mamet, but he's kind of gone off the rails over the years, so,
Yeah.
if you want to say that.
That's the thing, is I need to actually see more Mamet. I've only, I think, seen a handful of his things. I generally like everybody you mentioned as well, but I will say that, like, Kaufman is truly another personality that I would put in the wheelhouse of somebody like Scorsese, where, I mean, I guess a little bit less so, because Kaufman clearly has an auteurish style. Scorsese, he has a style for a lot of his work, but he also doesn't limit himself. He makes all movies in all kinds of different genres, or that pushes through different genres. But Kaufman is sort of like, he's very much an auteur in the sense where if you see a Kaufman script, like, it's clearly him. Like, he has these boxes that are checked off on pretty much anything he does, where it's pretty easily recognizable. And yeah, Scorsese has traits that he uses for his films, but I think that he's a lot more diverse in what he explores. I mean, I guess you could say something like that about somebody like Spielberg. But Spielberg is, I mean, he's kind of now I've always known him as he's the stereotype for when somebody said, like, here's the word film director, they think of, like, Steven Spielberg. And he very much, I think, built a career around the idea of not pigeonholing himself. And I think that that's sort of what made him be considered great by many people as well, was that he had themes that overlapped, but generally speaking, Spielberg, like the same year, right, he made, like, Jurassic Park and then, like, Schindler's List. Like, it's just, like, two wildly different kinds of films that are both considered masterpieces in their own right. So obviously he in a sense, I mean, he took many cues from Kubrick. And Kubrick,
he's my favorite director.
Yeah, well, Kubrick is
don't call me a film bro just because I love Kubrick. I love Kubrick.
No, yeah. Kubrick is my second favorite director, so I'm definitely not going to go that way. So Kubrick, I think he's bulletproof, because I understand the criticisms that a lot of people have about Kubrick, and that, like, he has a cold approach to filmmaking. But I think that it's also because he's detached, in a sense where he is so concerned with just, frankly, just the craft of all of his work. Like, he's, again, somebody else who did not want to be pigeonholed, and yet when you see a Kubrick film, the way it's shot and the way it's framed, it is very distinctly him. Like, there's no question for the majority of his filmography. So I think that in that sense, that is something that somebody like Spielberg, in my opinion, can't really live up to artistically, frankly. I mean, Spielberg still made some of the greatest films ever. I'm not going to deny that. But yeah, Kubrick, I think, defined the idea of a film auteur for, like, for the, I guess, quote, new Hollywood generation of films. He just was so, frankly, he's just so meticulous about everything he did. And I think that that's, from a craft perspective, like, I think that that's why he doesn't work for certain people who like their films a little bit more, like, low and dirty and kind of a certain grittier ilk, perhaps, maybe don't have the same kind of appreciation for Kubrick, because there is an argument to be had, I think, that when you focus so much about every little detail being perfect, that you lose perhaps the soul of a project. I don't agree.
I was about to say, I don't agree with that. I feel,
Yeah.
You were saying earlier a lot of filmmakers tend to be misunderstood. I think Kubrick is that way too, because a lot of people call his films cold. I disagree. I think his films are it certainly does feel like a window looking in, but I do think there is emotion in his work. A lot of it is anger.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
I think his war movies, I think, are very angry movies.
Yeah.
And then Eyes Wide Shut, I don't know what the fuck that was, but it's Barry Lyndon. I'd love to rewatch it again, because I remember not loving it as much as I do some of his other ones.
It's funny, because you're the first person I've heard say that, and I agree with you. Barry Lyndon is the only Kubrick movie I've only seen once, and it's funny because it's the only one I haven't been dying to revisit. Actually, no, that's not true. There's his earlier films, one or two of them, like his very first one, Fear and Desire, I've only seen once. But Barry Lyndon has been the lowest on the list for sure, as far as films that I want to revisit. I still very much want to, and I feel like it will probably improve. My opinion probably will definitely improve on a revisit, because that's how every one of his films have been for me. So I'm with you there for sure. I think that there was just something that didn't quite connect with me in that film that did far more so in the majority of his other films. So,
though it's hard to describe Kubrick as well, because I think, it's like, I can see where people are coming from when they say his films are cold and detached. I disagree, but sometimes I find it hard to explain why. I think they're wrong.
Yeah. Yes. And have you heard Tarantino's take on Kubrick?
No. Though I'm sure he has some interesting opinions, because I mean, that dude's a savant when it comes to movies, and that's me saying that, so there you go.
So that's what's funny, is I agree with you when you say he's like a savant. But I think he has the dumbest take about, like, he's not a fan of Kubrick. And I mean, I don't know if there's a part of me that's a little defensive about it, but his issue,
wasn't he inspired by The Killing? It's actually the only Kubrick film I haven't seen.
He might, that I haven't gone far enough down the rabbit hole. That wouldn't surprise me, because the Killing feels Tarantino-esque. I will say that much. That's for sure. But he had this criticism about Clockwork Orange, that he basically said Kubrick is a hypocrite, because he says he's making this story that's trying to wag its finger at the idea of violence, and yet it revels in violence, whereas Tarantino's like, I love blood, I love violence on screen, he doesn't shy away from it. He's just like, that is who I am, and that's what I embrace. I love the idea of excess, and he just wants to be so unabashed about it. But what I read this sort of interview, I don't know if it was a full interview, but it was like some sound bites, at least, from Tarantino. I don't think it was out of context. I mean, I know a lot of people argue, you're taking this article's taking blah 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 out of context. They represented enough of his statement where I don't think that any context was missing when he said, I think that Kubrick is he does admit, he's a great craftsman and this, that, and the other, but he says that he's a hypocrite, because he says the first 20 minutes of Clockwork Orange, he says, is fantastic. But then he goes into this mode of wanting to deconstruct or zoom out and criticize society for the way that it rewards and or punishes violence. And I think that was just...
That is a really dumb take.
It's a really shallow take, for one thing. And so,
I'm like, that's what the movie's about. I can't even say you don't even understand it. It's just you're being stupid.
Yeah, I know. But what's funny is he's also what's funny is, like,
God,
I think if Kubrick was alive, and he, like, if he was alive and basically had heard Tarantino say that, like, I almost feel like he would have agreed. I almost feel like he would have been like, sure. Because do you know the whole, like, legend behind what happened with Clockwork Orange being inaccessible for decades?
Is it because of the weird language? You mean like the book?
No, the film.
Well, I can see why it's inaccessible. There's a lot of graphic violence and sex in it, so...
No, when I say, I mean literally inaccessible. Like, basically, he pulled it from circulation. After the film came out, there were copycat crimes.
Oh yeah. I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when people were emulating the stuff that was happening with Alex DeLarge, that was all.
Isn't that the point of the movie, that he's only a byproduct of the violent, depraved society around him?
So...
That's my interpretation of the movie. It's my favorite film of all time, so I'm taking some beef with this one.
So that's what I'm telling you. Is people misunderstood it. They misunderstood the point of the film, right? Obviously, I mean, that's sort of the... that's sort of the point. That's sort of the concept that you have that Kubrick was exploring. But the issue was, because there were these copycat crimes, because people were indulging themselves in the violence, because of all of that, Kubrick said, well, I failed. I mean, he basically, what his argument was, like, I can't live with being culpable for anything if people misunderstood my work. So he basically said, like, I don't want this to be shown anymore. So even though he may have made something that was great and many people would say is a perfect commentary on violence, Kubrick himself as an artist felt like a failure from it. So he pulled it. And basically, until he died, I think it was pretty much not accessible. Like, it was already banned in a lot of places, and he just basically encouraged that to continue. So it's a fascinating kind of dichotomy there, where it's like, this is a great film. He did an amazing job with it, and yet, he still was like, if this is really causing a problem, that just means that I'm at fault. Like, I didn't do my job well enough, essentially. So I mean, it's clearly indicative that he's self-critical, you know.
Yeah, I was about to say, I don't know if I would agree with Kubrick, but then again, I'm definitely biased because
Of course, that's what I'm saying, man. People are not always the best judges of their own work.
I have a Clockwork Orange shirt. It's my favorite film of all time. At least right now it is.
See? So there you go, man. It's so fascinating how...
it's just a great idea, too. Like take this evil person and then take away his choice.
Right. Yeah. And I assume you've read the book, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the book is obviously amazing too.
It's one of those things. It's kind of like Train Spotting, which is also like top 10 favorite movies of all time for me. I feel like if you watch the film first, it gives you a better understanding for when you read the book, because you can imagine it's them saying it, so it makes it flow better. At least that's how I view it. Yeah. Those movies, anyway, and the books, because I have them anyway. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you again.
No worries. But yeah, no. My point was just remaining that artists are not hardly ever, I should say, great judges of their own work. I mean, I think that you can be somewhat objective and go like, hey, my this film that I did is better than the last film that I did, or like if you're trying to build your skills, like say like I am with the stuff that I work on, like my short film turned out way different, for example, than I had originally intended. But after all of the time that I spent on it,
Mm-hmm.
I was very happy with the end result, because I was like, because it actually took me such a long time to complete this project. I had so much. I didn't have any time limitations. I had so much time to figure out what I was saying, and then what I was saying with the film changed over time. So even though it was minor, like most of the changes were arguably minor tweaks. When I was able to make some editing choices on the final cut, the entire meaning of my whole film changed to me, and I think that like it became something else. It started as one thing, and then it almost became the opposite of what I originally intended, but it reflected sort of my change as a person. So I think that as a means of artistic expression, that work that I did, I'm quite proud of it, because it represented my own personal conflicts and what I was trying to toil with, and then it represented a change in me. Now, if I get to work on these other projects that I'm hoping to do, let's say another 5-10 years down the line, God willing, if I'm able to make a feature or 2 or 3 or whatever, I'm sure I'll look back on it and be like, ugh, and really cringe,
I'm sure.
But
I know I do when I look at some writings I did years ago.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's funny, because that was the first, I think, instance of me being like actually proud of something that I did, where I didn't cringe while looking at it. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
there are things that are not perfect about it. I will admit, like there are things that I wish would be better, or that I could change for sure.
Well, I mean, nothing's perfect.
Yeah. So I'm gonna be critical of it, but like I'm actually at a point where I was happy with how it turned out. So that was enough for me.
I think that's good.
I was happy. That was a good spot for me to be.
It's good to have healthy self-criticism and not just be like, well, this is shit, and then the other guys are just sitting there like, what the fuck? We just spent like however many months working on it. You can't just ditch it now just because you don't like it.
Exactly. It was like, does this do what I want it to do? Yeah. It's sort of like I had some discussions some years ago with some friends in a writers group, where it got to the point where we're talking about revisions on scripts and whatnot, and we're like, okay, so how do I know? Because like this could always be better. Like I could spend hours and hours in this. So we had to come down with sort of like a principle of, it's asking yourself, does this need to change, or is this basically, could this be better, or does it need to change?
Mm-hmm.
So like it's having to sort of parse out those two questions.
I generally dislike artists who seem to lack any sort of awareness. I know you like Lars von Trier, but I find he kind of falls into that trap, and including my least favorite director of all time, Zack Snyder. But I don't think they fall into the same thing. I think they're very different in terms of what they're interested in. I do think they have a similar issue, is that they think they're making great art, and then it's just like, or well, this is how I personally reacted to a lot of their movies. I just think, wow, this is stupid, and I walk out. I've had a lot of debates with friends of mine about Lars von Trier, because I really don't care for his movie. I liked the house that Jack built, but again, I just feel like I don't like him as a person and his movies. And here's the thing: it's like if there's someone you don't like and their movies are fine, that's fine. But the thing is, I feel like Von Trier puts himself into a lot of his movies. So you're like,
Yes.
yep, I don't like this. This feels really self-aggrandizing, and I don't like it.
So that's that.
I'm sure you have thoughts on that.
What I like to say about I agree with you about Zack Snyder, for sure. But with Lars von Trier, I think that I like to tell people too that I like him almost against my better judgment, because I do feel like he is kind of a cringy person in a lot of ways.
I should backtrack and say I know I probably don't get it, or I'm an idiot, or whatever.
No, that's.
I just don't like his movies.
So.
That I've seen.
With Von Trier, for me, he's very confrontational, and obviously he's a provocateur. So he revels in the uncomfortable. So I think that's fair. I mean, he goes places that a lot of people just aren't willing to go.
Yeah, but it's like there's. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt again, but it's like, yeah, but then there's other guys like Kubrick, or even S. Craig Zeller. I don't know if you've seen any of his films. And
it's funny you mentioned that. I'll let you go back to that, but S. Craig Zeller, I had not heard about maybe a month and a half ago. I met somebody who was like, dude, you got to check out his films, and I gotta say, yeah, I'm a big fan. So
he's very good. I'm actually reading his novel Race of the Broken Land right now. I just started it last night. Good stuff. But my point I was making is, there's guys like Kubrick, or Zoller, or even Nicholas Winding Refn to a lesser extent, even though I think he's made some films that are a little self-indulgent at times. Looking at you, Neon Demon. I think the thing is, I think they do much more interesting stuff with it than he does it, personally speaking. I know you're very different in your opinion on Lars von Trier. But then again, I haven't seen all of his movies. I've heard his earlier stuff is way better, but, I haven't seen it, because,
Just out of curiosity, which ones have you seen?
I saw Nymphomaniac Part 1 and 2, I saw Melancholia, and I saw The House That Jack Built. I actually liked The House That Jack Built, despite my issues with it. Because I like the Dante's Inferno parts of it. I know it's not really Dante's Inferno, but it's basically kind of like that. And I like how it goes into the psychology of this twisted man.
Yeah, I liked. I like all of Lars von Trier's films. I think. He's one of the few directors. There's maybe one that I'm not sold on. I think there's one that I'm not sold on. One of his very early ones. But again, it's one I'm willing to revisit. But the thing about his work though is it is I do think I would parallel him to somebody like David Lynch in a way where he operates on a certain psychological level that many filmmakers don't dare to travel to. I think that Von Trier does it in a more he does it in a methodology that operates more in on a level that has to do with emotion, like just extreme emotion.
I wouldn't disagree.
Whereas I think Lynch is somebody who operates on a level that has more to do with for lack of a better term, I would say Freudian psychology.
I thought you were going to say dreams.
Well, that's true. That in a literal sense, that's true because Lynch literally, he does all of his work is based on dream logic, in almost a literal sense. Yes, but because of that, I mean, Freud himself was all about interpreting what dreams mean and this, that, and maybe I guess you could argue that Jung was more into that kind of stuff, but there is something very Freudian, I think, about Lynch's work, more so than Von Trier. But I think that Von Trier's work is more raw in a way. However, yes, I would encourage you maybe to check out some of Von Trier's earlier stuff to get maybe more of where he's coming from, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Breaking the Waves is probably his most, I don't want to say palatable, but it's his most uplifting film, which is funny because it's very, very dark still.
Oh boy.
But again, it actually has like the ending is very like spiritually uplifting in a weird way. My personal favorite film of his is Dogville.
I've heard that's good, but again, after the last 3 movies I've seen from him, I'm like, I don't know if I want to see it.
Yeah, it's maybe a commitment, but again, I think that he is one of those filmmakers that takes, you gotta have to be willing to go a certain place, and if you're not willing to go a certain place, it's understandable that you may not be able to palate, where he's taken you. I know that, to be honest with you, so for Pride Month, I have a lot of friends in the LGBTQ community. I've been trying to seek out more films that deal with queer themes because, especially growing up in the context I did, I never really explored or had much of an interest in those kind of movies before. So I'm trying to make like a little bit of an effort to explore some of that. And one director who's well known, I don't know how familiar you are, is Greg Araki. And I had just watched a few nights ago the film Mysterious Skin. And holy cow, man, that is one of those movies where, I mean, you're talking about Von Trier, but if you watch Mysterious Skin, it's sort of like, it's another one of those examples of a film where you watch it and go, this was so well done, and I never want to see it again.
I know Persona has homoeroticism in it. I know you're a big Bergman guy.
Yeah, you know what's funny?
Though it's more Persona, of a subtextual thing.
Yes. Persona is yeah. I mean, obviously, as you know, I could talk about Bergman for hours on its own. Persona is the film that's the film that kind of broke him in a way. Like it really, it was him reinventing not just his own style, but I think it was him reinventing like possibilities within cinema. And I mean, it's obviously like a huge influence on people like David Lynch. Like whenever I talk to people who are like David Lynch fans, I'm like, cool, well, have you seen any Bergman? And they're like, oh yeah, I've seen Seventh Seal. And I was like, okay, so you're into like normie Bergman, like you're into like the
Hey, don't make fun of Seventh Seal. That is a great movie, all right?
It is a great movie, but I think it's mid-tier Bergman.
If that's mid-tier, then that is a damn good mid-tier. I'll put that way.
Well,
masterful mid-tier.
He's my favorite director, and I like Seventh Seal a lot, but it doesn't even crack my top 10.
That's fair.
But what's funny, going back to the idea of an artist being critical of their own work, my favorite film of all time is The Virgin Spring.
I've heard that one's really good.
And Bergman hated The Virgin Spring. In his mind, he considered it as a rip-off of Kurosawa. Like he said, this film was, he's like, I was obsessed with Kurosawa at the time, I made this revenge story, like, I felt like I was a samurai. He basically is like diminishing what he did with Virgin Spring. I was like, dude, it's such a fucking amazing movie though. Like
I feel the same way. I watched Kurosawa. I've been trying to get more into Kurosawa, and I watched Aikuru, and oh my god, what a movie! Just ugh.
You know what's funny is Ikiru is the only Kurosawa I've seen in theaters.
That must have been a very fun experience. I just saw it on my TV here in my house.
Yeah. I mean, this was a few years ago with my Filmosophy Club. We got tickets. There was a Kurosawa retrospective in LA, and That was the film that happened to be playing on a weekend where we could like all go. And yeah, I mean, I would obviously love to see so many. Dude, seeing something like Ron or Seven Samurai.
Oh my god, I love Ron so much.
Yeah.
And that's the first one I saw when I was like a kid. I didn't know who Akira Kurosawa was until way later, but I was just blown away by it.
Yeah. So that's the thing, man. It's really funny how again, it's just weird how like artists are not, like I said, not always the greatest judge of their own work. And I mean, so Virgin Spring for me is the ultimate example. And it's just so funny to me how all of that plays out, because I actually have a story. A good friend of mine he went to film school at NYU, and he's a few years older than me. So he met Bergman.
Wow, that must have been a really interesting experience, because I was kind of surprised. I'm like, I saw he made a movie in 2007. I was like, I thought he lived a lesser time than that. I thought he would have died before then. But all right, hey, glad to see he's still trucking on.
Now his career spanned 7 decades.
Oh my god,
it's pretty crazy. Yeah. So Saraband was his last film. And so that's what's funny though, is my friend, this was in the probably early 2000s, maybe a couple years before that, 2 or 3 years maybe before he died. Bergman was apparently directing, because again, he's another director that was born on the stage. He was directing a play in New York. So a good friend of mine had the pleasure of meeting him, and he went up to him, and this is a case in point of what I'm talking about. He went up to him and he said, "Hey, Mr. Bergman," however he addressed him, I'm such an incredible fan of your work. I'm such a huge admirer. And he said, like, the Virgin Spring, like, just really cut deep and just really moved me. And then he said he laughed at him, and he was like, "Why do you watch this film?" And then after that he said, basically, you need to get out more and you need to get a girlfriend.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
He's like, the Virgin Spring, Bergman's basically telling me, like, I'm such a virgin for liking that movie. So that's.
I wonder what he would have said if I told him I liked The Seventh Seal. Oh god, I dread that moment.
I think he likes The Seventh Seal. I think I remember him saying he still had fond feelings of it. It was just, Virgin Spring. I think that was the one that stuck out for him, I think, in the context of his canon. So.
Isn't that the one Wes Craven
yes,
remade, his Last House on the Left?
Yeah, Wes Craven made his entire career off of ripping off Ingmar Bergman for his debut film. So I'm a little bitter about it, because he took everything that was interesting about that film and basically neutered it. So yeah, that's another little sad fact about it all. I like some of Wes Craven's stuff, but I have really mixed feelings about him overall. And that, again,
I think John Carpenter's a better horror director, but that's me.
Yeah, and so it's funny too, because even John Carpenter, there's so many interesting rabbit holes we could go down here. What's funny about John Carpenter is he never intended to be a horror director. I think calling him the master of horror is too narrow. I think he was just a master of genre fiction, really. I think he was just a master of genre films. Asking me, if you ask me, like him and like Spielberg maybe. Though I have mixed opinions on Spielberg. There's movies I love from him, and there's movies I'm like, that didn't quite hit that. And I'm with you there for sure. Like, I feel like Spielberg obviously the 70s is where he made himself, but like I feel like the late 80s through the early 2000s is like all peak Spielberg, like almost all. But then I feel like ever since the early 2000s, his work has taken, in my opinion, quite a nosedive in quality. But that's a whole thing too. It's funny too, because I have some friends who are again grew up massive Spielberg fans, and
Oh, I still hold many of his films very fondly, like Jaws and E.T.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's no denying that. But this is where it's interesting too, because you get into a conversation about how do you judge it? How do you really judge the caliber of an artist? Is it based more on their peaks?
Would you call Spielberg a film bro movie maker?
Maybe not, because I feel like film bros would consider Spielberg normie. If we're gonna get really into the, if we're gonna get into the weeds.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I've been interrupting a lot. I'm sorry.
No, dude, no. I mean, I could obviously go on these trails for a long time, but yeah, no, it's funny because I have some friends who again grew up on certain Spielberg films and hold him. Obviously, like I have a friend who thinks he's the greatest director of all time, basically, and he's a full-on cinephile. Like, this guy's seen probably triple the amount of movies that I've seen, and he has very complex and interesting ideas about film. And so it makes you kind of cant your head and go, like, really, of all of them, like I mean, Spielberg's done amazing stuff, but
I wouldn't say Spielberg cracked my top 10. I wouldn't say that.
Yeah,
for me,
I know. But again, it's sort of like, I think that this is, again, it's a philosophical question of, are you judging a director based on their track record or on their peaks? Because if we're judging on our peaks, like, people can justifiably say, like, Francis Ford Coppola is the top 2 or 3 director of all time. Whereas if you're judging on consistency, he's not going to crack the top 100.
Yeah, I mean, Coppola's a whole other deal. I actually met a guy who worked with him on, at my college. His name's Gray Fredrickson. Very interesting man. I interviewed him for a story because my school got recognized. Because my college, Oklahoma City Community College, apparently is a big film school, actually. So, there you go. Got recognized recently, so good job, guys.
That's awesome.
But yeah, really interesting. I asked, because, I'm a big fan of the Godfather films, and, I mean, if I had, like, a greatest American film of all time, I might say The Godfather. I know some would be like, it's so normie, but can you blame me? It's a great movie.
Yeah. I just hate those questions because I don't know, like, it's so hard for me to answer. Again, like, I say Virgin Springs, they have a lot of, like, personal, obviously it's not American, but as far as what I consider my favorite film, for many years I did consider, like, Blade Runner my favorite because as a huge sci-fi geek, it was very much like...
I love Blade Runner as well.
Over the years, I gained much affinity for it, and this is it fits the pattern too of like filmmakers say, and again, my top filmmakers like again, so my top 3 would be first Bergman, then Kubrick, then probably Lynch. And then maybe Tarkovsky after that.
I want to watch more Lynch. I have Blue Velvet here mocking me, and I just haven't felt the mood hit me to watch it.
Yeah, it's Blue Velvet is interesting, and it is a little. See that again. The thing with Lynch is you got to be ready to go there.
Yeah, I saw Eraserhead. I'm like, okay, show me what you got, and that film was like, this is like a fever dream. I don't know what's going on here, but.
Yeah, and so I'll be honest with you, dude. Like, my experience with Lynch, it has to do with the fact that this is another thing that again Von Trier said. He said this statement is ironically in a meta way has stuck with me. The way that the statement itself communicates this idea, which he says, a great film is a pebble in your shoe. And so, like, ever since I heard that, I can't stop thinking about it because it fits. I think it fits Von Trier, but more so than anybody else, I think for me it fit David Lynch because.
And it just sounds like him justifying how his films are secretly good.
but
I'm a bit cynical there, but continue what you were saying.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing though. Is it's all about being willing to go there. So, I do think that Von Trier's films are writ large very good, but they're all. It is one of those things for me that it is difficult sometimes to parse out the artist from the art itself, you know?
Well, that's the thing with Von Trier. It's kind of hard to distinct, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Because, I mean, it's similar, like, for me, I have a similar struggle with Tarantino.
Oh, yeah. Here's the thing I think about Tarantino. He's good at making good movies, and then occasionally he'll make, like, a great one. Like, yeah. I think Reservoir Dogs is way better than Pulp Fiction, personally speaking. My friend Carlton might shoot me or assassinate me for saying this, but, you know. But, yeah, Tarantino's such a lightning rod, you could say. I really like his knowledge of film, and I love his passion for film, but do his films always stick? That's an argument for another time.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Tarantino, though, is I used to, vehemently dislike Tarantino. Like, whenever somebody brought up Tarantino, I would be like, man...
You just start getting angry.
I used to really just strongly dislike him, and I'd be like, Pulp Fiction's the most overrated movie of all time. Like, you know, I would just go off the rails with it.
But I wouldn't disagree with that. Still think it's a good movie, though.
So, yeah, I mean, I've had conversations with film friends where it's like, is it amazing? Like, did it change independent film? Did it break barriers? Yes, yes, and yes. Is it also the most overrated movie of all time? Also, yes. Like, so...
I was about to say, Reservoir Dogs is a better movie.
Yeah. So, all I have to say, though, is in regards to, Tarantino, I had an interesting, personal shift. Again, I graduated in 2009, so back then, I was interning for Lawrence Bender, who was Tarantino's, good buddy and one of his big friend producers. Lawrence and Tarantino, I think, co-produced at least all of their films up until that point. So while I was there, I had the opportunity to read the script for Inglourious Basterds before the film came out.
Oh, wow.
And so I got to pull up the script, and I was like, oh, interesting. And so at first, what was funny is, all of my impressions about Tarantino were, everything I disliked about him was, sort of front and center, where it's like, okay, this scene is way too long. They just keep talking. What are you doing? Come on, man. And then
it gives it character, man.
The guy, I know, but it's the guy also can't spell for shit. I was just
You can't spell?
As a grammar Nazi, I was like, well, I wish I could mark this up and hand it back to him and be like, fix this. I was
so
just
petty, but I love it.
No, I know. That's what I was feeling, because again, I had such a bias against him at that point, you know? So I was marking, I couldn't actually mark the script up, mind you, but I was writing coverage, and I was at least, going through it, and I was like, man, because I'd heard, okay, I don't remember his exact background. I think, I know he didn't go to film school. He either dropped out of high school, or he just, I don't know, I know he just made his whole path by working in a video store, So I know that much, but all I know is it's all right, this feels like it was written by a 13-year-old, just by quality of the spelling alone. I was like, and so then I thought about the title and how it's misspelled, and I was like, was that intentional? I'm not so sure anymore. But anyways, but as I was reading it, by the time I got to like page 20 or 30, I was like, wait, hold on, like I'm actually really enjoying this, and this is like a page turner for me now. And then I started to like back up, and I was like, you know, maybe I need to rethink how I think of Tarantino, because this is like actually one of the best scripts I've read.
I think that's why I like I give Tarantino more leeway. He's a writer, I am too, so I give him some more. I tend to, not that I don't entirely respect directors, because I think directors are great, but director-writers I think are really interesting as a writer myself, because it's wholly there. I feel it's it's like the most complete vision of auteur theory. Everyone's always talking about that.
Yeah. And see, that's, you know, it's funny too, because like going back to Bergman, you know, he wrote practically everything he did. Like his stamp is all over everything. I mean, except for, it's funny, one of the few exceptions is The Virgin Spring. That's one of the few films he didn't write himself.
That's probably why he doesn't like it.
Exactly. That's probably why he didn't like it, you know. So that's, that's very accurate actually. But yeah, and I mean, this is also circling back to, you know, mentioning Robert McKee earlier. Even I remember in reading Story, McKee makes the argument that like in order to be a great director, you have to be a great writer first. Whether or not you are the writer, like you have to understand the mechanics of storytelling in a very thorough way in order to be a great director. And he says he makes it. I don't know if I fully agree with this, but he makes the argument that all of the best directors are also the best writers, and Ingmar Bergman was one of the examples he used in that example. But yeah, that's sort of kind of another side argument. Back to Inglourious Basterds, though. What's funny though is in reading that script, as much as I loved it, there were like 2 scenes where I was like, these scenes are terrible and they stick out like a sore thumb. I was like, this is really dumb. I don't know why this is even in here. Like, what was he thinking? I was like, 90%.
One of the things. I'm sorry. Continue what you were saying. Oh, I was all right. Jinx. I'll let you go first.
Okay. All right, I'll go first. I'll take this opportunity now. Finally. So yeah, 90% of it was like great. 95% of it maybe. A couple scenes where I was like, this is like horrible. So then I had some friends and we were about to go see it when it premiered. And I told them, you know what, like I really, really liked the script. I'm interested to see how it turned out, because there are a couple scenes that are so bad. Like, I'm wondering how they will translate.
You were flexing your friends like, yeah, I've read it before we're seeing it. Oh, yeah.
There's a little bit of bragging rights there, but we went to go see it, and I walked out, and I was like, you know what? Those scenes didn't even make it into the movie. I guess somebody told him along the way, that sucks. He maybe had the mature enough gall to be like, all right, I'm letting go of that. And then it turned out, in my opinion, I actually think that is his best film still. So that's I think that hit all of his strengths in the best way, and I felt like he followed through. Although the other one, my top 3 Tarantino are Inglourious Basterds, Jackie Brown, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I know is a controversial pick. Yeah.
I was about to say, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I was kind of lukewarm on until around the very end of the movie.
Yeah. See, that's what's funny though is I loved it. I understand that criticism, but like I'm also everything about that is sort of my wheelhouse. I love true crime stuff that has to do with that era of Hollywood. I'm fascinated by the whole Manson stuff. I'm fascinated by. So I was expecting something else, and I was like, wow. By the end of it, I was super impressed. I get why people think it's like indulgent and boring and whatever, but like I was just having a fun time the entire time with that movie.
It's fair.
So I get the criticisms and whatnot, but I think that it's the first film he made that was like he did it a little bit with Inglourious Bastards, but like it was his like love letter to Hollywood, like the stuff that he loves, and he does it in a way that fits his identity and his wheelhouse, and I felt like it. Yeah, he did a great job with it. But I wanted to circle back real quick to something else, though, in regards to the conversation, say, regarding like Lars von Trier in this quote about the pebble in your shoe. So the thing is, I was talking about this in the context of David Lynch. David Lynch, somebody when I was a freshman in college showed me Eraserhead, or they gave me a copy of it. They're like, dude, you gotta watch this movie. It's a total mindfuck. I was like, okay.
It is.
And then I had a very straightforward perception of how a movie should be and what it should do. And like, I watched 5 minutes of it and I was like, this is like horrible. This is just like arty nonsense. It's just like, it's just indulgent crap. Like, what is this? I don't want to watch any more of this. But then I was like, I'll just watch 5 minutes more, okay? And then I'm going to turn it off. And so I kept watching. And then I was like, my opinion remains. This is awful. This is just nonsense. It's just random images thrown on the screen.
It's inane.
I'm not. What is this? I hate it.
Yeah, I'm typically more story-driven myself, but I do like more experimental stuff if there's something they're trying to say, or if there's story going on underneath, like Stalker, for instance, which I own.
So my experience though with Eraserhead was me renegotiating with myself every 5 minutes about how I wasn't going to finish the movie. And I ended up finishing it, and then like I was like, I hate this. This sucks. But then like a week later, I wanted to watch it again. I was like, okay, I don't like it, but I feel like maybe I missed something, and I was like, okay, but I put the thought out of my mind. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do it. I watched it again a year later, and I was like, okay, I don't hate this. There's something going on that I can't describe, but it still frustrates me, and I still have an issue with David Lynch. And I had a similar experience with most of his films. I had a similar experience with Mulholland Drive.
Oh, man. Imagine a 12, 13-year-old kid watching that. That was me when I first saw that movie. Oh, my Lord.
Oh, man. That had to be something. That's
all my God. That ending was, like, it kind of creeped me out for about a couple days after that.
I can imagine, my friend. That would be, I saw that in college. And
it's like, creepy old people. And I, like, ran in my room.
Yeah.
Cried.
Yes. But I returned to Mulholland Drive, and by the third time I watched it, I was like, this is probably my favorite film of the last, like, 20 years.
I think what's interesting about Mulholland Drive is just the way he deconstructs the myth of Hollywood. I think that, because, it's taken a long time for me to really come to terms with Mulholland Drive, though my personal favorite one is still Elephant Man. But I do think Mulholland Drive is interesting because it's kind of his deconstruction of Hollywood. And I've heard Blue Velvet is very similar in that way, how it deconstructs the illusion. Yeah. And I thought, that sounds interesting. I like when people do that well. So that's kind of my drive to watch Blue Velvet sometime in the future.
Yeah, Blue Velvet is more of a deconstruction of not Hollywood, but 1950s suburbia, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
It just, and that's what's funny is Lynch loves it. Like he it's sort of like he has this entirely like it must be like this yin and yang. I mean, I know that obviously he's super into transcendental meditation, and all of that is about unlocking pieces within your own mind, you know, to find like peace and wholesomeness in life. And but in order to do that, you have to go to really dark places. And it's just funny because as a person, as a human being, David Lynch is such a like delightful, like charming person.
Yeah, he seems like a really cool dude. Like just he seems like a guy you could just have like a tea. You could just have like tea with him.
Exactly, and so that's what's so fascinating, you know. He's like, yeah, but in order to like achieve peace, like we have to make peace with the demons within ourselves, and we have to like give them the space to scream at us. And that's what's fascinating. Are you a Twin Peaks fan at all?
I've never seen it, believe it or not.
Okay, so
I want to though.
Yeah,
I have a friend who loves it.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Twin Peaks. There's this whole thing about the history of. It really is like the most groundbreaking show of all time because it did so much for the medium when it happened, and yet it was rejected by its own audience. It's this just the history of what happened with the networks and Twin Peaks and Lynch. All of that stuff is fascinating.
I've heard it's kind of like acid X-Files.
Yeah, it influenced so many things because I mean it was a year or two before X-Files, and it definitely influenced the X-Files in the way it approached its media. But it's still the thing about Twin Peaks though is it is, even though it's a television show and it kind of has a soap opera quality. It is also an indictment of television. Like, and people don't. This is one of the things that's really under the surface. And dude, this is kind of ridiculous. But I went down some intense rabbit holes, and I watched. There's this guy who basically. I don't know his name. He's a YouTuber. This guy is utterly brilliant, though. He's probably like the smartest YouTuber I've ever watched. And he did basically an entire dissertation video is basically what I call it on Twin Peaks and what it all means. Like he basically says, David Lynch is elusive with meanings, you know, and people see surrealism and the tools he uses as something that's very like abstract. But he's like, actually, what he says is, just so you know, I'm about to tell you everything that Twin Peaks means, and I'm going to prove my points. And
what's that guy's name?
I don't remember his name. I'll have to look him up and send it to you. Basically, I looked up like Twin Peaks Explained, and it was one of the top videos. This video is like 4.5 hours long, so I had to watch it in like.
I was about to be like, so. I was about to be like, is it like collaborative learning? Because, I mean, you want to go down some rabbit holes.
No, yeah.
There you go.
I followed, speaking of that, yeah, Rob, I forget his name, who did collaborative learning. I forget his name, but the guy who did collaborative learning, his name's Rob something. I really enjoyed his videos for a while, but he went down some pretty, I think, absurd rabbit holes over the last couple years that I did not really track with personally. I think he kind of developed this like ideology to the way he approached his work, which I wasn't a huge fan of personally. I still love a lot of his stuff on Kubrick and The Shining, and he still does a lot of great work. But
that's another one. I feel like The Shining is often misunderstood and overcomplicated.
Oh, and his stuff on Eyes Wide Shut is amazing. Like, even more so than The Shining stuff. All of the research he did into Eyes Wide Shut is like, that was fun. He has, like,
Eyes Wide Shut kind of annoys me as much as I enjoy it, because I feel like a lot of conspiracy nuts just latch on to it. And especially because Kubrick died. And I generally just don't have a lot of patience for conspiracies.
Oh yeah, and I'm with you there. But that's what's fun about it. See, here's the thing.
I mean, yeah, there's a certain fun about conspiracy theories, but I just don't have the patience for people who unironically believe in them.
Yes, I'm with you there. I am utterly fascinated by conspiracies, and yet I also don't have any patience for conspiracy theorists. But yeah, that's what's fun is he goes down these rabbit holes, and to be fair, he is very objective and goes like, there's a lot of conspiracy theories about this. I'm going to explore some of that, but he's like, some of these ideas I'm going to just debunk outright. And so he observes and he mentions these patterns about he explores the patterns that Kubrick is exploring, but he also acknowledges like this is where people actually cross the line. So I do appreciate all of the work he did on the Eyes Wide Shut stuff. But all that aside, this other guy I'm talking about who did the Twin Peaks dissertation is what I call it. It is so fascinating, man. But also, I don't recommend watching it until you've seen the entire series.
Yeah, I know. So I want to watch it. I have friends of mine who just love it and have told me to watch it. And I've wanted to.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Season 3, so season 2 is horribly spotty. Like, it starts out really strong, then David Lynch left, and it became like a lame soap opera for a while. And then he came back and he directed this incredible finale. And then the show ended for 25 years. And then he did season 3, and what's great is season 3 he had complete control over. And season 3, in my opinion, is the best thing Lynch has ever done, and it's the best. It's my favorite season of television, like, ever.
Even over Elephant Man?
So, dude, yeah, Mulholland Drive. I love Elephant Man. Mulholland Drive is my favorite film of his, but the favorite, if I could count Twin Peaks season 3 as a film, I would consider that my favorite, because it is just unfiltered Lynch. Specifically, there's one episode where he explores the mythos of what Twin Peaks is in this really like metaphysical way, and it is just a trip. It's just crazy and super, super cool. But yeah, that entire series is amazing. The third season is just like front to back is incredible. So it's really worth exploring. I do have to wrap this up a little bit fairly soon. But
okay.
I do want to say there was one other thing that I wanted to circle back to one more time.
Oh, okay.
Which was.
I was about to say, I was starting to get hungry and yeah. So.
Yeah, no worries, man. Yeah, and I know my wife has to do some stuff in the office here soon anyway. So I do want to say the idea of the pebble in the shoe. That's this theme that I love to return to, because
now it's gotten stuck in my head.
It's no, but I'm just telling you, like, as an aspiring storyteller and filmmaker, this is sort of like it's in some ways like my ethos. It has become that statement from Lars von Trier, because great art, I think, stands the test of time because it remains in our consciousness, and because of that, I think that, like, I mean, we've talked a little bit about like Tarkovsky and stuff like that. There's different filmmakers throughout history who have had works that stand the test of time, and also filmmakers like that who aren't afraid to take their time. They have they demand sort of a sense of attention in order to fully appreciate and have a rewarding experience with what you're engaging in. And yeah, some people won't always have. Obviously, like, the average filmgoer may not be able to experience that rewarding depth of the art form maybe as much as some others, which, that's fine. People have their own interests and whatnot, but I find film is a medium that really, for me personally, not just in my career, but just in general, like, it articulates and adds meaning a lot of fresh meaning to life. And it says a lot about us as human beings and as a species. And I think that one of my goals as an aspiring filmmaker, or as a filmmaker, I should say, I have made films.
Do you want to be that pebble in the shoe?
That it's.
I had to ask. I'm sorry.
It's not my main goal. It's not my main goal, but it is my hope. That I can make something that sticks with people. But the pebble in the shoe is more about. It's more about the idea that great art sticks with you, because it is something that's subjective in a sense, and you also can't force it to happen, because there are pebbles that have come into my shoe that probably didn't mean to be there, in the first place. But what I'm kind of trying to say here is that what I want to communicate to other people, especially if they may not be as familiar with the world of cinema, or maybe haven't really reached those specific depths of wanting to engage with artists, say like David Lynch, because he's emblematic of, I think, my growth as an artist, but also as a person, where I want to understand why there's value in something that doesn't seem to have meaning on the surface. Mm-hmm. And yes, I think that there are artists out there who are quote unquote pretentious, and I hate to use that word.
Yeah, it's kind of a trite word nowadays.
Yeah, the word pretentious is one word that I don't think is ever a valid criticism when you're talking about art, because if we're talking about film, it's all pretense. Like, you're literally pretending when you're making a film. So, like, in a technical sense, I don't think it works. But also, I don't mind calling a person pretentious if that reflects who they are as a character. But for works of art, I refuse to ascribe that label really to anything. But what I have to say about that is, I would just like to encourage people, like, if they don't necessarily like something, but they believe that there is something worth exploring, I just encourage people to not write anything off. Even if you don't think something is worth exploring in a certain artist. What I have found is it's always great to give an artist a chance, even if you're completely biased against it. I'll give one example, and then we can start to wrap things up here. But there is one film that I've seen that is sort of a microcosm of my experience in changing my perspective about this art form. And it's a movie that came out, I saw this at AFI Fest probably maybe 8 years ago. The film is called A Spell to Ward Off the Darkness. It's a pretty obscure experimental film. And when I tell people about this film, I don't expect anybody to have the same experience I had with this film, but I just like to talk about what that experience was and why it's meaningful to me. Because when I watched this film at the festival, I very much had that critique that I, say, had several years earlier to somebody like David Lynch or Lars von Trier or what have you, where I was watching it and I was like, all right, come on, you're just throwing random images at the screen, or you're just filming people talk and it doesn't mean anything. You're just trying to be like this profound, like, stereotype of an artist, basically. This sort of disingenuous pseudo artist or whatever. That was how I was engaging with that film. I felt very strongly opposed to what I was watching. I was like, this is just bullshit. Basically, I was like, I don't know, like, I hate it. I hate it. I just don't want to. But I was like, look, I'm here in the theater. I'm sitting in this seat, and I am allowing this artist to, or it was was 2 directors, I believe. I was like, I'm allowing these artists, I'm giving them my time, so I may as well try to enjoy my time, right? Or I may as well at least give the benefit of engaging in the experience from beginning to end, right? And so I established this ethic after watching this film where I would never not finish a film. Even if I hated it, even if I really had a horrible experience, I would always try my damnedest. And I don't always succeed at this, but this is just a general ethic I have when it comes to the art form. I will, if I can help it, I will not turn off a film before the credits roll. So as I was watching this film, I felt utterly indifferent to it until the final 10 minutes or so. And then a scene happened in those last 10 minutes that completely made me rethink my opinion of the entire rest of the film. And I won't reveal what that is. And again, that those final 10 minutes of that film, they probably do speak better to somebody like me for other reasons that I don't need to go into right now, but they do probably speak more profoundly to me than they would to a lot of people. But all I know is that my mind completely changed after those final 10 minutes on that film. And even though I didn't enjoy the first 70 to 80 minutes, I considered that one of the best films of that year. And I revisited it a couple years later, and I showed it to a few friends, and the experience was, I enjoyed the whole film that time because I knew how it was going to come together. I knew what this all meant to me. You know, and that's sort of like that's the journey you go on when you're watching a film, is that you're entrusting the filmmaker to feed you a story that has a sense of meaning and a sense of significance. And I mean, this doesn't just apply to film, right? Like, if, you know, we're talking about whether it's novels, whether you're watching a play, like whatever it is, anything that has to do with an art form of expression. The point of the art is to engage with it and try to give it a fair shake. I mean, it's not going to be fair to expect everybody to watch, 20 to 30 hours of The Wire to be like, oh, this is the best show ever.
I really enjoy The Wire, though.
I see, here's the thing, and that I bring that up to say I couldn't get into The Wire for the first 2 seasons.
Oh, man!
I couldn't, and I don't know what my problem was, because once I started season 3, I was hooked, and then the whole rest of the series I loved. And I have yet to return to it, but I do think that it is one of the best shows. But I don't expect anybody, when it comes to television, I don't necessarily expect anybody to have that kind of investment, to put the sort of effort that I do into it. But when you're watching a film, if you're watching a movie that's 2 or 3 hours, I would just encourage people, just try to give a filmmaker just give them a chance, and maybe they will be that pebble in your shoe. And all I know is some of the films that I consider my favorite films, I didn't like at first, and they became a pebble, and I had to keep going back to them, and then they really built up a very specific and profound meaning in my life. So that's just really what I wanted to say. I think acquired tastes, I think, tend to taste some of there's probably a less sloppy way of saying this, but acquired tastes are the tastiest to me. So yeah, man, that's all I kind of wanted to say.
All right.
I mean, I could go on for hours and hours, but I know we all have limited time here, and I'm sure people have other things to listen to as well. So.
Well, Andrew, thank you for coming on, man. I appreciate this conversation we had. I'd love to have you on again.
Yeah, man, it was fun for sure. Yeah, I
the
appreciate
stuff I wanted
me.
to talk about. like our mutual love of Philip K. Dick. But maybe we can save that for next time.
Yes, that's a whole... Yeah, there's so many untapped things we could go into there.
But anyways, thank you, Andrew, for coming on. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I did. Hope you had fun, Andrew.
Definitely, man.
Next week, I'm going to be having a journalist and friend of mine, M. Scott Carter, on. So that should be fun. So, yeah, anyway. Thank you, Andrew, once again, and see you guys later.